Great, yeah. That's very good. Thank you. Thank you. In the past, when we were first visiting Mysore settlement in Balakupi, Tibetan performers were wearing this traditional Tibetan hat. So those hat looks. It's going back. Sound keeps going back and forth. So this time when I'm in the States, so here in New York, this is the last leg of the trip. So here, when we speak in cuts, so I've been asked to give teachings, and generally Tibetans prefer empowerments and rituals and so on, which are of course a source of blessing. But generally, I prefer to give introduction to Buddhism. And if people have a good basis of the basic understanding of Buddha Dharma, then the empowerments and those rituals are helpful. But without that kind of basis, then taking empowerments and so on are not that beneficial. So generally, so I prefer to give general introduction to Buddha Dharma at the beginning. The reason for this is, as you have heard, so in the past in Tibet, although the Buddha Dharma was very widespread, it flourished extensively. But when it comes to understanding of the Dharma, it was not very high. So people say, oh, just pray to the Buddha. So that's basically the level of people's understanding of the faith. So where is the volume control? It's too high. So if you have the understanding of the Buddha Dharma, then of course your practice will be wonderful. So these days, for example, even among scientists, so those who are not themselves Buddhists, they take great interest in the essence of the Buddha's teaching, one of which is the teaching on altruism and also the philosophy of emptiness, particularly the philosophy of dependent origination. So this philosophical outlook of Buddhism, so this dependent origination idea is something that some scientists particularly pay great attention to. Because this understanding of dependent origination is really helpful to have a deeper understanding of the nature of reality. So they really like it. So this Buddha Dharma, in order to practice this, first you have to study, then you have to reflect, then you have to meditate. So these study, reflection, and meditation is really the key. So when you study and when you reflect, so Buddha have taught extensively. We should ask question, what is the significance of these teachings? And do they reflect the reality? And this is how you should examine and experiment. So Buddha Dharma in general, and particularly in the Nalanda tradition,
재상어 지 산제의 최대 딱세체 드라지 에미 출루
So
점물이 되가 안다 출루미 맨다고 먹고요래 에 디디다
we're not getting.
망체 라나소스 최대 딱세체야서 돼 하람 룩스 민도가 땀바 대단 대 마에네 최네 숭샤버 tel야 이지적으로 신 숭샤하지 마도 딱세체야서 민도가 산제 좀 된데 이니 추스리아
In the world, of course, there are many different spiritual traditions. It's just
만화도 남준에 뭔지에 별 강정김이 라마 고모주 숭야라 강사라 당당중 최라 딱세 거 딱세셔야 돼 쉬우지 계속 숭기야래 자 들이 인도산에 상제베 아니 중국 나라래야 아니 대제 대주 예대베
Check.
But I'm not hearing him, though. I'm not
상말로
hearing him.
마 낭벨레 검 나라 숭기 저렇게 해서 야하나 차샤나 폐질 무디비 좀더 남샤 14고지 산제베 중국 나라 베노로빈 랭댕기 얘는 우모님 그 산제 때문에 나라 다 쉬우세부터 봐. 괜히 시수 차신 쉬우세부터 봐. 대다텐라거다 shum만 나라 무디그 저네 차버 말고 좀더 딱버 말고 좀더 멘다디디 영유도 봐. 저디디 그 간단하게 제도를 해야 돼. 개시보 이뭐 인상 디송기하래. 제도를 해야 개시보 멤버체 산제비 처를 접수치 야고를 러버이나 디데 제도를 적고 하면 누가
sorry, we're not hearing anything through the headset.
그 제도를 제국에 인도산에 애네 산제비 중 나라라 애네 제도를 쉬우시 넘도 봐. 자 들이 인도 말하자다 산제비 최대 대바지고 그 말이
before. I don't know what
그
happened.
간다벽에 쌈땅 짜라체 도센 애네 그 로가지 뭐 인도산에 어다 남중에디 천지 제벽 그돌이야 애네 낭수 모두 해야 돼. 존중시키기.
Can you take it out?
엔다 들데 니마치 다 주주주하래. 쇼게 주중지다 권다 주중지. 애니
So this is why I emphasize giving introductory teachings to Buddhism instead of empowerment and so on. So we have 2 sessions of introduction to Buddha Dharma. So I will use the text of the second book of Kamalashila's Stages of Meditation. And the significance of that is this middle part of the Stages of Meditation is an important text. Adisha came to Tibet in the 11th century. He taught and wrote a text, Lamp on the Path to Enlightenment. However, in the 8th or beginning of 9th century, Shantarakshita, one of his principal students, Kamalashila, came to Tibet at the request of instruction of his teacher, Shantarakshita. And at that time, so although they were Chinese meditation teachers from China inside Tibet, and there was a dialogue between the Chinese Chan meditation masters, and so they were there during the Shantarakshita's time. So, for example, at Samye Monastery, there were many different departments established, and in those departments, we know there were departments for conferment of the Vinaya vows and study of the Vinaya, and then there is a department on translators and translations, and then in Tibet, they were thanks to Padmasambhava's contribution, who was himself a tantric practitioner, and so there were mantrikas So there is also a department composed of tantric practitioners. Then there was a separate department which is known as the Meditation Center, which is where the Chan teachings and their students were based. So while Shantarakshita himself was alive, there were Chinese teachers. Even these days, their teaching is alive, the Chan teachings. So later in Tibet, so the masters of the Chinese Chan tradition, they emphasized meditation primarily, and word spread that you don't need to study. Study is not important. Therefore, Kamalashila had dialogues and conversations with the masters of the Chan tradition, and so the content of those dialogues were written down at the request of Tisong Detsen, and he actually requested Kamalashila to put it into words, into letter, the content of that dialogues, which then became the stages of the meditation practice. So the text itself is very comprehensive. It's actually the entitled Stages of Meditation. So the section on presentation on special insight and shamatha, calm abiding, or tranquility, are quite extensive. In contrast, if you look at Atisha's lamp on the path to text, although there are presentations on shamatha and vipassana, but the actual presentation itself is based upon assumption that the reader and the practitioner of that text is a believing Buddhist. So the style of presentation is quite different. For example, when we were in Tibet, majority of the Tibetans were devout Buddhists. So the text can be written in such a way where faith is emphasized, the approach of the faith is emphasized. However, these days, some of you have already drank your tea. So this time the translations, so since the translations are done simultaneously, we will have more time. So the organizers have arranged this. I would like to thank you. So at the beginning, so when you are giving teachings on the Buddha Dharma, so first, the tradition is to pay homage to the Buddha, the teacher of the Buddha Dharma. Do we have Pali chanters? Do we have someone who can chant the Pali suttas? So first, we will have a Pali chanting, which is taking refuge in the three jewels. And this will be followed by a Sanskrit a recitation of Heart Sutra, which is a central text of the Perfectional Wisdom Sutra. which is something that we regularly recite. So we will recite that in Sanskrit, and this will be followed by. So since the Buddha Dharma went from India to many different places, Buddha Dharma in general, and particularly the perfection of wisdom teachings, so we will have a Chinese chanting of the Heart Sutra, because this is where the Buddha Dharma went first. This will be followed by then Tibetan. So on the first day, we will have a full chanting of the Heart Sutra. So let's begin with the Pali chanting.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranam gacchāmi, dhammam saranam gacchāmi, sangham saranam gacchāmi, dutiyampi buddhaṃ saranam gacchāmi, dutiyampi dhammam saranam gacchāmi, dutiyampi sangham saranam gacchāmi, Tatiyampi buddhaṃ saranam gacchāmi, Tatiyampi dhammam saranam gacchāmi, Tatiyampi sangham saranam gacchāmi. Bhavatu sappha mangalaṃ rakhantu sappha devata sappha buddhanupavena sada soti. Bhavantu te bhavantu sappha mangalaṃ rakhantu sappha devata sappha dhammanupavena sada soti. Bhavantu te bhavatu sappha mangalaṃ rakhantu sappha devata sappha sanghanu Bhavena Sattva Soti Bhavantu Te.
Thank you. Thank you. Now Sanskrit. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, yeah. That is Sanskrit. Yes.
Om Anirodham Manutpadam Manuchedam Shashvatam Anekarthamananarthamanagmamam Manirgamam Yah Pratita Samutpadam Prapanchopashmang Shivam Deshyama Sambhustang Vande Vadata Pragya Paramita Hridaya Sutrang Namah Sarvgyaya Aryavyukteshvara Bodhisattva Gambhirayang Pragya Paramitayang Charyang Charmano Vyavlokiti Sma Panskandaha Tashang Sabhav Shunyan Pashyati Sma Yeshariputra Rupang Shunyata Shunyatava Rupam Rupan Pratak Shunyata Shunyatayana Pratak Rupam Yadrupang Sa Shunyataya Shunyata Tadrupam Evme Vedana Sangya Sanskara Vijnanani Yeshariputra Sarvdharmaha Shunyata Lakshana Anutpanna Niruddham Lana Vimla Nonana Paripuna Tasmashariputra Shunyatayang Narupam Na Vedanana Sangyana Sanskarana Vijnanani Na Chakshu Shrotra Grana Jiva Kaya Manasing Na Rupa Shabda Gandha Sasprashta Vedharmaha Na Chakshu Dhatu Yavan Manodhatu न विद्या न विद्या न विद्याक्षयो न विद्याक्षयो यावञ्जरामणं न रावणं चयो न दुःखसमुदय निरोधमार्गा न ज्ञानं न प्राप्तिव्यं बोधिसत्त्वस्य प्रज्ञापारमितामाश्रित्य विहरति चित्तावरणः चित्तावरणनास्तुत्वात्रस्तो विपर्यसातिक्रान्तो निष्निर्वाणः त्रयदेवसुताः सर्वबुद्धाः प्रज्ञापारमितामाश्रित्य अनुत्तरां सम्यक् सम्भवति अभिसम्बुधाः तस्माज्ज्ञातव्य प्रज्ञापारमिता महामन्त्रो महाविद्यामन्त्रोऽनुत्तरमन्त्रो संसम्मन्त्रः सर्वदुःखप्रशमनः सत्यमित्यत्वात् प्रज्ञापारमितायां मुक्तो मन्त्रः तथा गते गते पार्गते पारसंगते बोधि स्वाहा गते गते पार्गते पारसंगते बोधि स्वाहा गते गते पार्गते पारसंगते बोधि स्वाहा प्रज्ञापारमिता हृदयसूत्रं समाप्तम् प्रज्ञापारमितां बोधो शुभरत्नाकरे स्वयं सर्वपारमितास्तत्र तदात्मनं व्यवस्थिताः निष्प्रपञ्चा निराभाषा निर्विकल्पा निरालयाः निस्वभावा परा सूक्ष्मा बिन्दुनादविवर्जिता प्रज्ञापारमिता माता सर्वबुद्धोदया परा प्राणुपलब्धिरूपा सर्वज्ञानगोचरा निरालम्बा पदे प्रज्ञा निरालम्बा महाकृपा एकीभूताः धेया साधर्म गगने गगनं यथा
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
心生般若波罗蜜多时，照见五蕴皆空，度一切苦厄舍利子，色不异空，空不异色，色即是空，空即是色。受想行识亦复如是，舍利子，是诸法空相，不生不灭，不垢不净，曾不见是故空中无色，无受想行识，无眼耳鼻舌身意。无色声香味触法，无眼界乃至无意识界，无明也无明尽，乃至无老死也无老死尽，无苦集灭道，无智也无得。一无所得故，菩提萨埵，依般若波罗蜜多故，心无怪无怪故，有恐怖远离颠倒梦想，究竟涅槃三世诸佛。依般若波罗蜜多故，得阿耨多罗三藐三菩提。不知般若波罗蜜多，是大神咒，是大明咒，是无上咒，是无等等咒。能除一切苦，真实不虚。不说般若波罗蜜多咒。咒曰：揭谛揭谛，波罗揭谛，波罗僧揭谛， 菩提萨婆愿消散障诸烦恼愿得智慧真明明了爱普愿在掌心小处，是常行菩萨道。
吐气切。Thank you，谢谢。吐气切。
So when they chant Heart Sutra in Chinese, there is a prayer at the end, a 4-line prayer. It is a very comprehensive prayer. It says, may I be able to dispel the afflictions of the 3 poisons, because the root of sufferings are the 3 poisons of the mind. And of these, the most fundamental one is ignorance. So, and the antidote for that is the wisdom, the light of wisdom. So the second line of the prayer is, may I be able to you bring the light of the wisdom, and particularly the wisdom of no self. So in brief, the subject matter of Heart Sutra itself, which is the teaching on emptiness of all phenomena, understood in terms of dependent origination. So you're making the aspirational prayer, may you be able to light the fire or light the lamp of wisdom. And all the afflictions, the antidote really is the wisdom. It's not the method aspect of the practice, but rather the wisdom. So you make the aspirational prayer. And then after that, so the third line says, may I be able to engage in the Bodhisattva practices. So the first 2 lines about dispelling the 3 poisons of the mind, as well as generating the wisdom of emptiness or no self, that's common to all the Buddhist path and vehicles. And what is unique to the Mahayana practice are the 6 perfections and so on. So then the third line, make the aspiration of the prayer, may you be able to engage in the Bodhisattva practices. So this, and then the final line says, may all obstacles to these may be overcome. So at this 4-line prayer is very, very comprehensive. So we will chant the Heart Sutra in Tibetan now.
yang de se shan jo sam ba sam ba jong bo pa pa chen de se wo jo je la je pa re do chen bo sa me je wa chen la nam ba bom bo nga bo de la la ya ra shen je dong ba nam ba da wa ne la jin ji tu sa da na ba je re bo chen jo sam ba sam ba pa pa chen de se wo jo la de ge je me so je je bo an la la she ro je pa re do chen ba sam ba je ba je ba de wa de che da la wa ja de ge je me ba da chen jo sam ba Papa Jana Savanjo Sadan Bajara de Pola de Mezo Bori Bori Alala Jera Parado Shaba Samo Shaba Java Java de Namada Vaja de Pumbonga Vajada Raja Doma Namar Yanda Vajazo Dao Zodomba Doma Nezo Zulu Dombani Shamaya Dombani Lejazo Yamayan Odejaro Sawadan Dojan Namba Javana Doma Vajara Bodeda Jodan Dombani de Senjimba Majeba Manga Sharaja Parodo Shambhala, Sama Java Meda, Shindon Dene, Yangalan, Sharaja Parodo Shambhala, Tenelana, Yanda was over Shanjo, was Sanja, Sharaja Parodo Shambhala, Rana Minyamba, Yabanga, Tomata Jaro, Shavajava, Mizubana, Shavaja, Sharaja Parodo Shambhala, Teata, Gade, Paranga, Parasanga, the Bade, Jerebo, Janjo Sama, Shiraja Parodo Shamba, Samala Lava Java, and the Jamja Ding and the Diligent Janjo Sama, Sama Jamba, Papa Jana, Somojo, Leso Shija Washington, Leso Leso Rejebo, Rejebo, Shiraja Tambashin, the Shiraja Parodo Shama, Samoja, Vaja, the Dijan Javana, Jazo Yeran, Jamja, the cars and the Sedan, the Vajara to the Parodo Sama, Sama Shamba, Papa Jana, the one to come to the Poro, the Lama, Lama, and the Vegeta. Something that is Nyandu Show was on Quishin, you see, and then Dola Pembrachana, Hamshin, you didn't do Zava, Kanda Yanda, the Tuno number of Nyandu Show Samuel Soldier, Sanjay King, Yundala Charles Law, Hangi Danger, one member, Chava member, or member, drummer, Tada Demi Danger, Travan is Zoba Sanjay, Tamba Della Charles Law. 관계 도생이로 나와도 제 방법에 담배 천년 된지 과담되나 상상로 뭐야다
So,
당연라
so first,
산지점 된데 전이죠
so the Buddha himself,
저주스베 되는 것거네
so as he's taught in the Bodhisattva Yanam, he taught about the three Buddha bodies, the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. So the Buddha himself was a Nirmanakaya, emanation body. So he appeared in the form of a human being. So to put it in plain English, he took the form of a human being, ordinary human being, first born as a prince. So in the text, of course, you know, the text describes the Buddha's kingdom, family's kingdom, as being very, very huge and important, but probably it was one among many kingdoms. So he was born as a prince of one of those kingdoms, and then so he lived in the palace, and as a result of seeing the coming into experience the four visions of birth, death, aging, and sickness, and then he adopted the life of a mendicant and left his home and entered the 6 years of ascetic practice. And so already the meditation practice, many of the concentration practice were quite widespread in India itself. So he engaged in these practices extensively, but he came to recognize that meditation and concentration practice alone is not going to lead to the elimination of affliction. So then he began to reflect on the view of no self and meditated upon this and contemplated it. And then in Bodh Gaya, so at dawn, he vanquished the Maras, and then he gained full enlightenment. So he displayed that deed, and then he turned the wheel of Dharma. So at that time, so in actual appearance, he was like an ordinary monk. He went on rounds to do back alms, and sometimes you can see that the Buddha felt ill and so on. So he displayed the appearance of a real ordinary human being like us. So ultimately, in Kushinagara, he passed into great nirvana. So in brief, he really took the form of a human being. So in actual reality, he had attained Sambhogakaya form, which is known as endowed with the 5 definite character attributes, always teaching the Mahayana Dharma, being surrounded by Bodhisattva, advanced Bodhisattva retinue and so on. So that form of the Buddha, Sambhogakaya, is something that we cannot see. And because of that, while remaining equipoised in the Dharmakaya, he assumed a human form, something that would be approachable and visible to us ordinary human beings. So this deeds that the Buddha engaged in is actually showing us a way. So if the Buddha was born right from the beginning as totally unusual, extraordinary, then we will not emulate his example, because we will say he was born like this. But on the other hand, if you look at the life of the Buddha, he displayed all the attributes of an ordinary human being. He experienced pain, suffering, disappointment, and worked very hard for 6 years of ascetic practice and so on. And he demonstrated that asceticism alone and subjecting your body to such ascetic practice is not going to lead to liberation. And demonstrated to us it's actually the cultivation of the view of no self which will ultimately lead to liberation. So Buddha's own life demonstrates to us what is the right path. Of course, in general, when Buddha taught the teaching, there were many, many disciples who were listening to his Dharma teaching, not just human beings, but the principal audience to which he has addressed his Dharma teachings were human beings. And also in general, when we talk about Dharma, Dharma has the connotation of transformation. So something like spirituality and religion is something that we find among human beings, but not among animals. Of course, the basic level of sense of caring and concern and love can be found also in animals. You have among the mammals as well as birds, but we cannot speak about religion or spirituality among animals, because spirituality and religion is something that is related to the mental level. So all the major religious teachings of the world, they speak of the emphasis of faith. In most of these traditions, there is an emphasis on religious faith. So these spiritual teachings connected with the faith is something that relates to the mental level experience, not sensory. So the religion and spirituality is found only among human beings, not in the animal world. So in the human world, that's why we find diverse religious traditions. So all of these teachings really needs to be cultivated on the basis of cultivating our mind. So these when we talk about the faith derived from the level of mind, this was something that evolved in the human society from a very early stage as the human beings came to become more and more civilized, as their cognitive capacity became advanced, and even the brain itself changed through evolution in terms of size, its capacities, and so on. So not just the brain centers that are associated with the sensory experience, but the prefrontal cortex, which is associated with cognitive activity, are much larger in human beings compared to, say, for example, like elephants. So the cognitive part of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, is much more developed in the human beings. So when human beings encounter difficulties and challenges, and that's when we seek comfort, solace, and hope. So this is how religions came to evolve. So in ancient times, so for example, in the very, very old time, days, in the old days, prehistory human beings, there were no houses. So they were living in caves, seeking shelters. So they are always afraid of the dangers posed by animals and so on. So that's why they prefer daylight rather than dark. That's why there is a worship of sun and moon and so on, because they provide light, and light provides protection. So you can see still aboriginal people, indigenous people who worship sun and moon, and we see that in Africa as well. So in brief, human beings, when they fear a threat and when they fear danger, they seek solace and protection from outside, and it's how and sunlight provides that kind of protection. So as human consciousness developed, become more and more sophisticated, one of the earliest institutional religious tradition is Samkhya tradition in India, and in Middle East, it's probably Zoroastrianism is one of the earliest religious tradition in the West, in the Middle East. So historians speak of 3,000 years of history. So in India, Samkhya tradition, so there was a theistic part as well as non-theistic Samkhya. Which of that appeared first, I don't know. So there is a Samkhya tradition. So maybe the theistic version of Samkhya tradition evolved first, because there is an attribution of power to a transcendent being, and then later evolved a non-theistic version of the Sankhya tradition as human reasoning became more advanced. I'm not quite sure in terms of the actual chronology, because also there are no experts living today who can make confident statements about this. In India, there are, of course, a lot of religious traditions, and there are religious teachers, but they are really emphasizing more the faith. But the very few Indian masters who really have a good grasp of the philosophical traditions of classical India. So I have had conversations with many of these Indian masters, but in any case, Samkhya is one of the earliest, then subsequently evolved many other versions of Hinduism. And then, so around 2006 or maybe 2,700 years ago, Jainism emerged. So Mahavira, so maybe about 30, 40 years after Mahavira, Buddha came to the world. So these are one of the earliest spiritual traditions evolved in India. And in the Middle East, you have Zoroastrianism, then Judaism. So I don't know what their internal connections, but also in Egypt, there was an Egyptian religious civilization. So although I'm interested, I haven't had the opportunity to talk to experts. And then in Persia, there seem to have also been an ancient spiritual tradition. So then, of course, you had the Judeo-Christian tradition, Christianity, Islam, and so on.
다 되게 출루 남을
So
되게 밀려야 편도야.
all of these major religious traditions were a source of great benefit to human beings because human beings need love and compassion. And when love and compassion are present, it leads to happiness. And today, even scientists, some of them deeply engaged in research, are beginning to speak of how the basic nature of human being is compassionate.
맨날 키운데 맨다고 말해? 나 맨저 이지스케메다. 리게버를 당가 이지메.
So you can make the mandala offering.
다시 룡아에서 롱조도선 계산했는데 네 구두도 되래.
So traditionally when we make mandala offering, we think of the Mount Meru and the cosmology based on that. But Mount Meru is something that I don't believe, because if someone asks where is the Mount Meru, we will have to say maybe it's somewhere around here, there. It doesn't really matter whether Mount Meru exists, because the Buddha, when he taught the Four Noble Truths, so he taught impermanence, no self, emptiness, and so on. And when he spoke the characteristics of Four Noble Truths, Buddha did not speak about the Mount Meru. So even if Mount Meru were to exist, it's part of the world of suffering and samsara. So when you are making mandala offering, there is definitely a blessing and inspiration, but the mandala concept of mandala itself, particularly the based on the Mount Meru, is not that important. Recently in South India, one of the chant masters was chanting this line, and which says that the sound of the great drum of Dharma, and he wasn't singing it properly, so sound alone isn't great. It's the sound of the drum, of Dharma drum. So we know that human beings need love and compassion right from the time of birth. We were nurtured by under love, our parents, particularly the mother, our mother. And if mother were to abandon us and we were deprived of mother's love, we wouldn't survive. So there are 7 billion human beings on this earth. They all survived on the basis of mother's affection and mother's milk. And not just human beings, but many animals and most mammals, including also some birds who come from eggs. But at a very young age, the offsprings are nurtured by the mother, and there is a very strong bond and love. So, say for example, like birds, so in Tibetan we have 2 words for birds and the larger birds, yeah, smaller birds. And then, so the so the Tibetans have two words for birds, and the one word refers to the larger ones that can walk, and the smaller birds, which tends to hop, have a different word. So the birds, at a very, very young age, the parents go and get the worms and then feed them. So when so in some of the other birds, they eat, the mothers eat like seeds and stuff, and then they've kind of, regurgitate it. And so I noticed this when I was young. We had ducks in the garden, and so the duck mother would actually regurgitate, and which the offspring, the small birds, can eat, because they cannot eat solid things. So you can see the power of nature. And so it's the same as the true of all the many other animals. So when it comes to affection and love, it's not just human beings. It is love and affection and the bond that really nurtures and makes the survival happen. Now, for animals, they don't have education. So while there is a dependence on others' affection, they will have that strong affection and feeling and bond. But once that need is no longer there, then that is gone. So then you also have certain types of animals like social animals. And their survival depends upon being part of that community. So within that social animals, there is a strong feeling of bond among the members. So those herd animals, you can see, so regardless of whether they are blood relation or not, the herd members have almost a sense of connection among them. And then you can see among the dogs that are part of the kind of band, they can smell each other and recognize. And when a new kind of smell comes, they get suspicious. So you can see that the role of affection and love is important for many, many animals as well. And we human beings belong to that category of social animals. So compassion and love is so important for human beings. So we tend to, so initially it's so relevant and forceful, but then gradually as we grow up, as the immediate need for affection and love becomes less, and we become more autonomous, then we tend to lose the appreciation of the value of love and compassion. So I always tell, the Buddha himself appeared in the form of a human being. We are all human beings, therefore, so whatever, all human beings are exactly the same in wishing to be happy and not to have suffering. So these days, even though all human beings are same, wishing happiness and wanting to avoid suffering, but human beings these days inflict harm on other fellow human beings as well. And this is a result of lacking in compassion. And particularly these days, very sadly, different religious beliefs has become a cause for conflict and killing. So as I mentioned before, all the religious traditions, including Islam or Buddhism, the central message really is love and compassion. That's the central message, that's the central practice. Among my colleagues and friends, I have Muslim friends. And one of them told me that if a genuine Islamic practitioner must extend love for all creatures of Allah. So these days, so there is a word, jihad, which is being spoken extensively. And some people think jihad means destroying others, waging war on others. That's not the case. I had a conversation on the meaning of this word with Muslim practitioners as well as scholars of Islam. And they told me that the true meaning of jihad is to engage in a combat within ourselves and to counter the destructive negative emotions within ourselves. So all the major world religious traditions that emphasize the teaching of love and compassion, in a sense, we are engaged in jihad, our own jihad, which is an internal struggle against our negative and destructive emotions. So, in all these traditions, the central practice is love and compassion, and that is their message. So, therefore, these religious traditions have been brought benefit to millions of people in the past. They continue to do so now and will be the same in future. So if on the part of individual religious people, if they engage in their religious practice seriously and sincerely, there's no problem. But if you just use religion as a label and then you start dividing yourself as I'm a Sunni, I'm a Shia, I'm a Mahayanist, I'm a Theravadian, and so on, then you create divisions and sectarianism. Therefore, if you engage in genuine spiritual practice without any sectarianism, then it will be beneficial to everybody. So therefore, these days, it's important for religious believers to be harmonious with followers of other tradition, whether you're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever. So on the part of each of us, it's important to have admiration for all other traditions as well. So these world religious traditions, they emphasize the teaching on the love and compassion. But these days, that's not adequate. The religious teachings message on love and compassion alone isn't enough, because out of the 7 billion human beings, more than 1 billion have no faith. They identify themselves as non-believers. And even among the religious believers, when it comes to actual practice in their life, they don't pay much attention to their own religious teachings. And this is because they happen to lack a deep conviction in the value of the human values, such as love, compassion, and so on. So when they hear about these words, they don't have much attraction. So, and some people use religion for their own personal purposes, like making a source of living and so on. So, for example, on my part, if I use religion, the Buddha Dharma, to simply make a name and make a living, then that would be a shame. So Chubsan Lama said that when he looks at some other monks, when they teach Dharma, I have great admiration. But when they, in their life, actually use Dharma to make fame and make money, I feel sad. And similarly, Sele Nazorangdu, who was a Nyingma master, Nazorangdu. So in his writings, he says that there are people who are selling Dharma. So these days there are quite a few selling Dharma. So there are some monastic members here as well. So when you go for refuge to the Sangha, so we will have to say, I go for refuge to the Sangha, except for those who sell Dharma for their own personal gain. So I think it's important to make sure that our engagement with Dharma, relationship with Dharma is sincere, that our mind is turned towards Dharma, and Dharma becomes part of our experience. So, for example, there are so-called religious people. If you ask them, in their own everyday life, spiritual teachings and practice have not much meaning. Last year, I was in Mexico. I visited a theological seminary that is connected with the Vatican. So I was invited to this seminary, and there were over 1,000 students there, seminarians. So there were few archbishops and bishops who have. So I shared with them my thoughts. So they were very, happy. So at that time, I said that we religious people, sometimes we tend to leave our religion on our costumes. When we're inside the temple, a place of worship, we feel, very disciplined and calm and spiritual. But once we take the costumes off and outside the church, there doesn't seem to be much trace of that spiritual teaching. So I shared with them. So spirituality is something that has to be brought to the level of mind. So your mind needs to be fused with Dharma. That is the meaning of Dharma practice. You know, it has nothing to do with putting on an impressive costume and sitting on a throne. So that's what I said. And they were actually quite happy with what I said. And one of the a senior archbishops, he came to see me the next day, to see me at the hotel. And he told me that you said this is very true, and it was really wonderful. So why do we have people who call themselves religious but do not show any impact of religion? Is it because people do not have a deep conviction and appreciation of the value of spiritual practices? And because of this, you see people who appear to be spiritual practitioners, but in reality, they do not show any spirituality. And this is what Jizun Milarepa was referring to. Who said that appearance of Dharma practitioner alone is not adequate. Dharma practitioners should display the effect of Dharma in their life. So I think we, the religious people, really need to take seriously the importance of the message of Dharma teachings. Wherever I go, I always say that whether or not you are religious, or you see yourself as religious, is an individual choice. But what is important is each one of you cannot, ignore the value of compassion and love. This is where we are all sane, 7 billion human beings. We're all equal in wishing for happiness and wanting to avoid suffering. And therefore, especially the spiritual practitioners should also think of not just oneself, but the entire humanity. So on the part of each of us individually, if we think more about the welfare of other sentient beings, then there is genuinely a basis for preventing many of the problems that are caused by human beings ourselves. Of course, there are natural disasters which we cannot do much, but majority of the problems that we experience are our own creation. So we are here about 15,000, maybe around 15,000 people, but we are part of the 7 billion human community. So we need to think about the welfare of the 7 billion human beings. And as much as possible in your life, everyday life, it's important to share with those whom you know, your loved ones, to emphasize the importance of love and compassion. Everybody appreciates the value of education, but what is important equally is the appreciation of the human values. So if people are able to recognize the value of compassion, love, and so on, then they will make the difference in their own life. So even from a personal point of view, if you are more compassionate, you will be greater, you will be happier, and also you will have a more meaningful life. So even if you want to fulfill your own interest, you need to be compassionate. If you wish to work for others, you need to be compassionate. So Buddha himself was a human being. We are human beings. So regardless of whether you are individually religious believer or not, so all of us are equal in the need for compassion. So of course, when it comes to the method of how to promote love and compassion, then the religious traditions differ in their method, and the philosophical outlooks are different. The theistic religions emphasize the belief in Creator, God, and the fact that this is a method for promoting love is very obvious. For example, if you ask them, how do you define God? They will say infinite love. So if the Creator, our God, is angry, vengeful, and so on, then the creatures will also be vengeful and angry and aggressive. But on the other hand, if the source, the Father, is infinite love, then his creatures, the sentient beings, will also share in that nature. So all the theistic traditions, when they characterize, define God, they speak of infinite love. So on the other hand, if we don't understand the significance of the teachings in the Mahayana Buddhism, particularly in Vajrayana, you do have iconography that depicts, deities with wrathful expression. So of course, the significance of these are to transform afflictions into the path. Because otherwise, there is a danger of seeing that the gods are angry. So I always say that maybe about 15 years ago, so a Japanese person came to see me to Dharamsala. So he said he went to Tibet and he went to Pangong Stupa in Yangtze. So it's a beautiful stupa. So, but there are some dark temples, and he was led there. And then inside them, there were many images with their fangs bad, very aggressive looking, quite terrifying. So he said he had a nightmare that night. He couldn't sleep. So he told me, he asked me the question, why do you have in Buddhist teachings, in the Buddhist tradition, and isn't Mahayana tradition supposed to be emphasizing compassion? But why do you have these images of deities with such aggressive looking faces? So I explained to him, that's not the case. These deities, so all are rooted in compassion, and appearances are assumed in connection with the need of sentient beings, and also how some of them are based on visionary experiences of yogis. So in any case, the theistic believers define God as infinite love. So the followers of such theistic tradition believe that each one of us is created by the God directly. So when you believe in such thing, then you will have real admiration and sense of feeling of closeness to compassion. So also there is a recognition that each one of us has the seed of compassion. So you can see how that approach can be powerful. And then the non-theistic religious traditions emphasize the role of cause and effect. They emphasize the role of cause and effect and dependent origination. So if you benefit others, you will experience happiness. If you cause harm to others, you will suffer the consequences. And help to others is an expression of compassion and love. So therefore, you need to embrace compassion and love. And since causing harm to others lead to suffering, you need to counter the underlying motives, which are anger, hatred, and so on, but embrace loving kindness and compassion. So those non-theistic religious traditions emphasize the teaching on law of cause and effect. So you have the Samkhya tradition, Jainism, and Buddhism. These three traditions belong to the non-theistic religion. So all three of them accept that there is no beginning to the existence of person or self. I had conversations with some Jaina scholars, and he told me that according to Samkhya theory, there is no beginning to the nature of to the existence of self or the person. And they explain the origination of the cosmos on the basis of what they call prakrit, which is a primal substance. And so he told me this eternal self has no beginning or an end. So although similarly, I think it's the position of Jainism, and in the Buddhist tradition as well, there is no belief in the beginning of continuity. So when it comes to the end, there are some Vaibhashika schools that believe in the terminal end of the continuity of consciousness, but most of the mainstream Buddhist traditions accept there is no beginning to the continuity of consciousness and there is no end to the continuity of consciousness. So for the theistic traditions, there is a beginning. In fact, each one of us is created directly by God. So that's the first life. And then the next life, the life after, is determined by your own action, either in hell or heaven. So I asked some of the Christian practitioners and scholars, what would happen if someone falls to hell? They said there is no clear answer after that. But so I teased them and said, if you were to be born in hell, then if it's kind of endless, that seems like a rather bad situation. So anyway, there is no clarity. I had a conversation with a Christian practitioner in Italy. So I had a long conversation with him about the nature of God. And then he explained to me the Trinity, the Father, Holy Spirit, and His Son. And I asked him, what is the nature of the Father and how do you define heaven? And he told me that in the text there is no detailed explanation. But on the other hand, if Buddhism is very nosy, Buddhism tends to ask a lot of questions. There is no beginning to the continuity of the consciousness. Questions are raised whether attainment of Buddhahood is possible, whether there is such a thing as a true liberation. So, for example, in the Pramanavartika, Dharmakirti's text, there's an extensive inquiry into these whole questions. So, the central objective of the Buddha's teaching in the Four Noble Truths is the attainment of cessation. And how does cessation happen? And is on the basis of cultivation of the path. What does path involve? Path involves elimination of the afflictions as well as their roots and seeds. And how can the elimination of afflictions be possible? That's because the root of afflictions is ignorance and it's a distorted way of seeing the world. Therefore, it's not in tune with the reality, and therefore one can cultivate the directly opposing perspective which sees into the nature of reality. So in brief, the Buddhist teachings are very extensive and also quite nosy, inquires after the nature of reality, into the nature of the path, into the nature of results, and how is such a thing as nirvana possible, and so on. So once I was in Delhi and I met with some teachers from Buddhist universities from Thailand, including some monastic members as well, and lay people, some scholars. So we had a meeting and I had a conversation. I had a good opportunity. So we spoke about the Four Noble Truths and the 16 characteristics of the Four Noble Truths. And I emphasize how it's the same across all the traditions, as well as the 37 aspects of the path to enlightenment, which are based on the understanding of the Four Noble Truths. Then I asked them, in the Pali sources, so how are these, say for example, 16 characteristics of the Four Noble Truths, when you study them, do you use reasoning or do you rely exclusively, primarily on the sutras, scriptures? And they say we rely on the scriptures. But if you think about the second chapter of Pramanavartika, Dharmakirti's text, as well as many other similar texts, so you can see, so that's the difference. There's a lot of reasoning. So in the many different traditions, so although teachings on love and compassion are the same across all the traditions, so therefore all the major religious traditions of the world are worthy of veneration and respect. We should admire them. But when it comes to philosophy, the Buddhist philosophy. In general, there are, as explained before, that there is a theistic religious philosophy and non-theistic religious philosophy. And within the non-theistic tradition, there are those who believe in eternal self, such as Samkhya and Jhana, Atma, which is a self. But in the Buddhist tradition, there is no belief in the concept of Atma or soul or self. The idea of self is something that is independent of body and mind. So in Buddhist traditions, all the Buddhist schools reject this. So the teaching of the no self is unique to the Buddhist philosophy tradition. So among the non-theistic tradition, there are those who believe in Atma or self and those who do not. So to put it briefly, Buddha himself appeared as a human being for the benefit of the human beings and explained how, on the basis of human life, utilizing human capacity, attained Buddhahood. If the Buddha had remained in his original form as Sambhogagaya, we ordinary human beings will not be able to see him or listen to his teachings. So in order to make that possible, the Buddha had to appear and assume the form of a human being. So in the Theravada sources, according to Theravada sources, the Buddha, until he attained enlightenment in Bodh Gaya, up to that point, according to the Theravada sources, he is an ordinary person, a human being. And then, remaining in meditative equipoise, then he attained full enlightenment on that day. So this, I think, is important. So the uncommon perspective of the Mahayana is that Buddha was already enlightened, and all the 12 deeds of the Buddha are really seen as deeds of the fully enlightened being. They are deeds that are displayed for the benefit of the human followers, but all 12 deeds are really recognized as deeds of a fully enlightened being. So therefore, on our part as Buddhists, on the first level, we need to recognize ourselves, our humanity, and then think of the well-being of all humans. Because in our daily prayer, we say that I go for refuge to the three jewels, and may through the virtue of engaging in the six perfections, may I be able to attain Buddha benefit of all beings. So if we take seriously this aspiration, then of course we need to take seriously the welfare of sentient beings. Of course there are multiple, countless world systems, but the beings in those world systems are not that related to us. But the beings in this world, the human beings, are directly related to us. So we have a moral responsibility to think about the need of the human beings. So all the human beings on this planet, we are either directly or indirectly related. So on the part of each one of us, we should cultivate compassion and a good heart. And then in our day-to-day interaction with others, we should relate to others out of that place. Regardless of whether you are a Dharma practitioner or not, if everybody acts out of their compassionate side, it's beneficial not just to yourself but also to others. So in this way, our interaction with others will be much more beneficial. So if one person has 10 friends, you can share this view with 10 people and show through example how to live it according to love and compassion. Then your friends will recognize the value of these qualities, and then they will share with others. Now, what hinders the expression of our kindness and compassion? It's the afflictive emotions like hatred, anger, extreme attachment, and fear. So these are the ones that undermine our peace. And the antidotes of these afflictive mental states love, compassion, and so on, which will promote, instead of disturbing our mind, will promote happiness and sense of security. So if we were to relate to other fellow human beings as a source of love, source of compassion, and objects of compassion, then it will automatically undermine the arising of afflicted states of mind. So if we are able to relate to, say, 10 people in our life in this manner, and these 10 people's lives will be affected, they will then be able to affect 10 more, which leads to 100, and those 100 will be able to interact and affect 10 more, tenfold. So in this way, you multiply from 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000, 1,000 to 10,000, and so on. So I always tell people, because often people think that, I'm just one person. What can I do to change the world? But when we talk about working for others, helping others, we cannot help everybody at exactly the same time. But it is by helping one person at a time and impacting the life of one person at a time. This is how we change the world. One individual changes his own family, from the family to the community, the neighbors, and so on. And this is how the world will change. This is how society will change. So we Buddhists who on a daily basis prays for the welfare of all sentient beings, this is how we should act. Because otherwise, if when we are sitting on our cushion we pray, but the moment we get up, we start acting completely contrary to it, deceiving people, exploiting people, fighting with people. That's totally contrary to the prayer that we make on a daily basis. So the first level is the recognition and appreciation of your humanity and relating to others from that point of view, from that place. And on the second level, as a Buddhist, you should then relate to followers of other traditions with respect, with reverence, with appreciation, because when there are conflicts arising in the name of different religious traditions, it's a real tragedy. So religious believers, on our part, we have a special responsibility to promote religious harmony and understanding. And on the third level, most of us who are gathered here are Tibetans, and there are American Buddhists here as well, and there are some Chinese, and there are Bhutanese, and maybe Nepalese in the audience. So all of us. So those of us who are traditionally Buddhists, but then there are others who have, taken new interest in Buddhism. Although you are not traditionally Buddhist, comes from traditional Buddhist family, but you have special interest in Buddhism. You feel attracted to the Buddha Dharma. So here, for your benefit, I'll be explaining the Buddha Dharma. So in Buddhism, so the Buddha, immediately after he attained enlightenment, he made the statement that I found the profound truth of Dharma, which is so difficult to understand. So for the time being, I will not be able to share it with others, so I shall remain silent. And this is a recognition of the Buddha's part, that what he has discovered is something very profound, something that may not be appealing to the people immediately. And this is true because the Buddha appeared in the cultural milieu in India, where everybody was talking about self and Atman. And the Buddha taught a contrary to this, which is the teaching on no self and no Atma. So therefore, Buddha felt that his teaching is something that will not be understood by others, even if he were to show. So then the Buddha was requested by Brahma and others, and especially the 5 immediate disciples of the Buddha, Kaudinaya and so on. So they made the request to the Buddha, and the first public ceremony he gave was the one on 4 Noble Truths. In the Mahayana teachings, scriptures, one speaks of the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. The first one is on the 4 Noble Truths. The second one on on the perfection of wisdom teachings.
되는 콜로 타마
And the third one
랑기
is sutra,
민도당 제윤지
clear differentiations. And one of the key texts is Samdhinirmochana Sutra, which is the basis for the mind-only school, Chittamatra.
콜로 타메
And in the third
소디
turning of the wheel of Dhamma, one of the important texts is also the Tathagata Garbha Sutra.
유라는 셰서사가 도데
And it's the foundational text for Uttara Tantra. So if you look at it, so the first sermon on the Four Noble Truths really lays out the basic foundation or the framework of the Buddha Dharma.
되는 콜로 발바디기
And in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma,
모디
then explains further the nature of the nirvana,
냠불기베 떡기
particularly the teaching on emptiness, which is particularly the emptiness of mind. And it's the purified state of the emptiness of mind is really nirvana, the true liberation.
어디 드니인지
Therefore, so in Nagarjuna's text, Fundamental Wisdom on the Middle Way, he says that how it is through bringing an end to karma and afflictions one attains liberation, and afflictions and karma arises from misconception, and misconception arises from ignorance. So in the Tibetan translation, it's the reads that it is by means of emptiness that we bring an end to the afflictions. I received I received the oral transmission of the sixth text of Nagarjuna from Second Senshar Rinpoche, but I also received the oral transmission on Nagarjuna's text from Lama Rinpoche. So he told me that the Sanskrit text can be read in both two ways. One is in an instrumental case, where it is by means of emptiness, afflictions are brought to an end. But it can also be read in a locative sense, where it is within emptiness, the afflictions can be brought to an end. So when we read it as the afflictions are brought to an end within emptiness, then we are referring to the cessation of afflictions. So when we read it in an instrumental sense, where it is by means of emptiness, afflictions are brought to an end, then it is referring to the emptiness of mind. So, for example, in Uttara Tantra, the emptiness of mind, which is referred to as the luminous nature of mind, and this ultimate nature of mind is presented as the antidote to the afflictions. So, and this Buddha nature, the emptiness of mind, is explained in Uttara Tantra by means of 9 examples. So in other words, it's explaining the subjective character of the wisdom, which is much more extensively explained in the highest Yoga Tantra, where it is explained in terms of clear light mind. So in the highest Yoga Tantra, where the practice is combined with the yogic utilization of the channels, energy, and so on, so we find the actual method for actualizing the clear light mind. We find this in the highest Yoga Tantra. Kongdan Rinpoche gave a metaphor. If you are climbing a pass, you cannot just go on a flat and then all of a sudden climb up vertically. But when you climb a pass, the ascent of that pass is always quite gradual. The slopes go up, up, and up. So similarly, when we engage in the path, it is in that gradual way that the Buddha has led us. So first being exposed to the Four Noble Truths, then to the teaching on emptiness, then on to the nature of mind, then ultimately to the clear-light nature of mind in the highest Yoga Tantra. So when it comes to the Vajrayana teachings, we were led through the 4 classes of Tantra and so on. So this Kongdan Rinpoche says, I think this metaphor is actually quite powerful. So in the Buddha's first public teaching, the Four Noble Truths, this is found in the Pali traditions as well, so it's the same. And particularly in the first public sermon, Buddha, he also explained the Vinaya rules, such as how to wear the lower garments and so on. So when it comes to the Vinaya rules and practices, there is no difference between Mahayana and Theravada. Of course, there are some minor differences in the enumerations of the precepts and so on, depending on what particular lineage one is following. But otherwise, the Pratimoksha Sutra in the Sarvastivada tradition is used in Sanskrit. In the Theravada tradition, the Pratimoksha Sutra is recited in Pali. So if you look at the listing of the precepts and so on, of the precepts, so there is only a difference in the very minor list, enumerations of the secondary precepts. So in the Sanskrit version of the Pratimoksha Sutra and the Pali version of the Pratimoksha Sutra, the numbers are slightly different, but those are not that important because, for example, rules that are associated with how to wear the lower garment are more enumerated in specific details in the Pratimoksha Sutra. In Pali, so there are 7 precepts, but in Pali there's only 1 precept which says that you should wear your lower garments properly. And the specific details are not listed there. But when it comes to the more basic precepts, they're all the same. So when it comes to Vinaya practice, so the Vinaya practice as well as the Four Noble Truths, these are very common. And also the meditation practice, 37 aspects of the path to enlightenment, Four Noble Truths, 16 characteristics of the Four Noble Truths, they're exactly the same. So one could say that the Vinaya and the Sutras are the same, but the difference is in the third basket, the basket of Abhidharma. So there is a difference, because from the Mahayana point of view, Abhidharma also includes the ultimate Abhidharma, which is the perfection of wisdom teachings. And the conventional Abhidharma, so the sutras, which are the basis for the Abhidharma teachings, shared similarly. So, of course, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras are unique to the Mahayana tradition, where the central subject matter is that of emptiness. And in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, the subjective wisdom realizing emptiness is presented. So those are teachings unique to Mahayana. These days in China, so in the past, Xuanzang, Tangsanzang or Xuanzang, he visited Nalanda, and he studied at the feet of a student of Dharmapala, a very elderly teacher. So he was the main teacher of Xuanzang, and Xuanzang's, so when he explains the meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, he explains it primarily from the perspective of Chittamatra, the mind-only school. So if I have conversations with Chinese scholars today, masters, although they are familiar with Nagarjuna's name, so they are referred to as the great middle way teachers. So they revere Nagarjuna, And in fact, Dharmapala himself commented on the 400 stanzas on the middle way. So in China, the Buddhist philosophical teachings really seem to be primarily that of Chittamatra, mind only. So of course, they revere Nagarjuna as well and follow Nagarjuna, but when it comes to detailed explanation of the teaching on emptiness, they seem to be relying primarily on the Chittamatra, mind only school. So the Chittamatra, the mind only school, is actually quite close to the quantum physics. So quantum physicists speak of how our perception shapes our reality, and our existence is defined by our perception. And in the Chittamatra school, we speak of constant co-cognition argument or reasoning, where perception and the object, say it's like a blue, and perception of blue and blue object are really seen as mutually dependent. And so both of them arise from the same source. So then in this way, they reject the duality of subject and object. So in quantum physics, there are ideas that are very, very similar to this kind of mentalistic view. I've had great interest in quantum physics for a long time. Recently, I was in Calcutta. I visited university. So I was introduced to one of the quantum physicists. So I met with him separately. So we had a conversation. So he explains the quantum view of understanding how the relationship between perception of reality, which is very similar to the mind-only school. So although they don't think about the mental world itself, but if you dissect the object, then you cannot find anything. So the external object, material object, so they don't have any objective existence. They don't exist in their own right. So this is again very similar to the middle way, the Madhyamaka explanation of the rejection of independent existence. So the Madhyamakas simply not just reject the objective existence of phenomena, but actually they explain emptiness in terms of dependent origination. Say, for example, Nagarjuna explains how dependent origination and emptiness of inherent existence coexist without contradiction in a single thing. And this is how the two truths are explained by Nagarjuna. So one and the same thing. So if we leave it unexamined, it performs its function at the conventional level. But if you were to search for its truth, then we don't find anything that is objectively true of that object. So the one and the same thing, looked at from two different aspects, looked at from a relative perspective or looked at it from an ultimate perspective. So when looked at from ultimate perspective, we see nothing. We see absence of objective existence. Quantum physicists generally tend to examine only material objects, and then they also have come to recognize the absence of objective existence. But then they don't take the next step and explain to us what is the actual nature of existence itself. But I think this quantum physics analysis is very helpful and important. There's an Indian physicist by the name of Rajaraman. He has already passed now. He told me the quantum physics ideas this is a new discovery in India, in the West. But the basic ideas existed in India about 2,000 years ago. because he said he came across Nagarjuna's writings, and the basic ideas of quantum physics were already there. So it seems that the Buddhist philosophy is very profound, and there's a basis for conversation. So in November, the physicists that I met in Calcutta and a couple of other quantum physicists, we're going to have a conference in Delhi. So we're going to meet in Delhi in November. So from on our part, from our side, we will have few gishis who will make presentation of how, according to Chittamatra, the objectivity of external world is rejected, as well as presentation of Nagarjuna's view that rejects objective existence of phenomena, where we say that form is emptiness, emptiness is form, and apart from form there is no emptiness, and apart from emptiness there is no form. So the Buddha turned the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, and the Pali teachings are part of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, particularly the Four Noble Truths as well as the Vinaya practice. And the third turning of the wheel of Dharma presents more specifically the teachings that are unique to Mahayana. So I already explained a little bit of historical background to the text of Kamalashila, so that we are using today. So Kamalashila's texts are divided into three books. The first book emphasizes more the shamatha practice. The middle part of the book emphasizes combination of shamatha and vipassana, and the third part of the book emphasizes, particularly the vipassana or special insight. So, for example, Rongten, the Sakya master, Rongten Sheja Kunrik, has composed a commentary on this text, which is excellent. I read that. I received the transmission of this teaching from Sakya Kempo Sangye Tenzin. I received the transmission of this from him. It's quite a rare transmission. He received it from... He did not receive it from Sakya. Once he went to Lhasa on a pilgrimage, and in Samye, he came across a man from Kham, and he was giving a teaching, and he was teaching the three books of Kamalashila's stages of meditation. So he received the transmission from him. So Sakya Tenzin. But Kempo Sangye Tenzin was not able to find out where exactly has this particular Eastern Tibetan master received it. So I can only say that Sangye Tenzin received from this other person. Normally, we are supposed to trace the lineage properly, but I don't have any clarity. And so I spoke with Kempo Sangye Tenzin. So I had conversation with him. I received Sakya Pandita's Richter from him and three differentiations of the three vows of Sakya Pandita's text. So I received some commentaries from him. So we had a conversation about the issue of continuity of the transmission. So that's when he told me that he has. So he told me that he has transmission of this text. So when I found out that he has Kamalashila's text transmission, so I immediately told him that I need this. So in the past, when Lingam Rinpoche was alive, whenever I was going to receive some other teachings from other teachers, I used to consult him. So he was my main teacher. When he was teaching me, I was a student. He used to keep a whip next to him. It's a yellow whip.
기주 레로 차고지.
So I used to be a lazy student, always fond of playing.
제전에
So
대자지.
Ling Rinpoche used to keep a whip next to him.
제자와 빼거리 참.
He's been very kind to me. He was very kind to me. So, but Ling Rinpoche wasn't in Bodh Gaya, so I didn't ask him. So I couldn't ask him. So I felt that I need to receive this transmission. So later, I told him that I can inform Khyentse Ling Rinpoche afterwards. So I received the transmission from Khenpo Sangye Tenzin at Bodh Gaya. And this is a very unusual, a special text. This is a text that was composed in Tibet. So then, at the request of Tison Desen, he composed this text. Yeah.
야가르게도 바바나 드라마 교육에도 권배를 봐. 잠시 쪽으로 차서 태고시면 도지수기 제수 주고 남기 권배를 봐 도르셔도. 저는 어디 되기 사용거라.
So we read that the translation is from page 59 of the program booklet. The title of the text is Stages of Meditation, and the word for meditation in Tibetan has the connotation of familiarity, cultivating familiarity. So the actual activity of consciously making to cultivate a familiarity, that is what is meant by meditation in Tibetan, the gom. So it's an active verb. So it is through constant cultivation that we gain familiarity. So it is an active verb.
검제다 최진주자네 검배를 봤어. 나한테 태고시부 도지수 제수 주고 남기
So he writes that I shall briefly explain the stages of meditation for those who follow the system of Mahayana Sutras. Meditation in general is common to both Buddhist and non-Buddhists, and it's also common within the Buddhist tradition for Sutra and Vajrayana as well. So Kamalashila is explaining here, he will be presenting subject matters of meditation practice more specifically for the Mahayana Sutras, Mahayanas. So Kamalashila was a follower of Nagarjuna, and he will be presenting primarily from the perspective of middle way school. So we read the intelligent, those who wish to actualize omniscience extremely quickly should make deliberate effort to fulfill its causes and conditions. The word intelligent connotes the need to raise questions, and you need initial skepticism, because without initial skepticism, questions will not arise, and without question, then you will not be able to engage in inquiry. So in Buddhist texts, particularly those of the Nalanda approach tradition, at the beginning of each of these texts, it presents what is the purpose, what is the subject matter, what is the ultimate objective and purpose of the text, and what are the connections between them. For example, in Haribhadra's commentary on professional wisdom, he speaks of two types of students. One is the one who approaches by the way of faith. One is the intelligent one who approaches the Dharma by way of reasoning and inquiry. So the intelligent ones do not rely on faith alone, will always ask question. What is the benefit? What is the significance? What are the underlying reasons? So one has to critically reflect on them, appreciate the significance and the purpose, and then you engage with the practice. Then you study. Then you critically reflect on this. Then meditate. So the approach of the Buddha Dharma is, as explained before, based on inquiry, the need to inquiry. So the text says that those who wish to aspire for omniscience, you should seek the causes and conditions. We all pray for the attainment of Buddhahood, not just for ourselves, but the mother sentient beings. So then we need to know how can we attain Buddhahood. So we need to understand what is that Buddhahood, what are the causes and conditions, how can we cultivate those causes and conditions. So we need to study and understand them. So those who aspire for Buddhahood, it's not adequate simply to make the wish and say Om Mani Padme Hum all the time. So what is required is to strive in understanding what are the causes and conditions. So the causes here refer to primarily the bodhicitta. So, and the root of bodhicitta is great compassion. So the principal cause or condition for attainment of Buddhahood is really great compassion. So it is compassion and bodhicitta that results from compassion. And the conditions here, so the causes here refer to compassion and bodhicitta, and the conditions here refer to. And just as compassion is important at the beginning, middle, and end, also the view of emptiness is also important at the beginning, middle, and end. So when we are introduced to the Buddha Dharma, right from the beginning, it is important to be introduced to the Buddha's teaching on dependent origination and emptiness. So in the middle, when we are practicing on the path, the most important instrument really is the view of emptiness. It's not bodhicitta. The actual antidote against the afflictions is really the view of emptiness, not bodhicitta. As Pramanavartika says that, bodhicitta, compassion, and so on do not directly, counter the afflictions. It is by cultivating the view of emptiness that afflictions are directly eliminated. So Dharmakirti says that elimination of ignorance can only result through the application of the antidote of wisdom of emptiness. So for example here, if we think about the temperature in this hall, there is no other way to deal with the heat in this room other than increasing the cool air. Similarly, if it is too cold, then the only method available is to increase the heat. So heat and cold are directly opposite each other. So whatever you do not desire, you need to deal with it by increasing its opposing force. So for example, if you are suffering from hunger, in order to remove that problem, you cannot simply pray and wish that may you overcome the hunger. You can only solve that problem by eating food, which is the direct opposite of hunger. So the elimination of the suffering or pain of hunger is by eating food. So sometimes maybe if you are an advanced meditator, you might be able to, there might be some individuals who might be able to deal with that through meditation. But in reality, for most of us, hunger can be removed by eating food. So the opposite has to be overcome and dealt with by increasing the opposite fires. And similarly, when you are really depressed and sad, medication is not the direct approach. Meditation can only dull your mind. But if something is making you really sad, the best approach is to think about what is causing you to such sadness. What can be done about it? How can one deal with it? What are the opposing perspectives and states of mind that can help me overcome this sadness? Similarly, when it comes to dealing with afflictions, anger, attachment, and so on, all of these have their own direct antidotes. But ultimately, the root of all of our afflictions is that because each of them arise from a kind of a distorted perception of reality, all of them are rooted in grasping a true existence, which is ignorance. I know an old American scientist. Recently, I went to see him last year. At that time, he was 90. I think it was about 96. So he's quite old now. So I met him about 10 years ago. He told me. So he's a specialist in cognitive therapy and psychotherapist. So he said that he has spent 50 years of therapy, and he said he came to recognize that when someone feels very angry, the object of that anger appears negative, but he says that the negativity that is perceived by the person, 90% of that is really just exaggeration. It's a mental projection of the person. It has no basis in reality. So this is exactly the same as what Nagarjuna says in his fundamental text on Middle Way. He says that how afflictions arises from distortions of mind. And he says that if you have a mind that grasps onto something, how can the poisons of afflictions not arise in the mind? So the root of all of the afflictions really is ignorance, grasping a true existence. So according to the Madhyamaka school, ignorance, the fundamental ignorance, is defined as grasping at inherent existence of phenomena. So the only way in which we can remove that and counter that directly is to cultivate the counter perspective, the opposing perspective, which is the wisdom of emptiness. Because when we distortedly perceive phenomena, we tend to perceive things as having objective reality out there with some kind of solid independent reality. And there's a kind of a grasping onto some kind of solidity, whereas the view of emptiness really undermines that kind of strong grasping. So once that grasping is undermined, then it really undercuts the basis for arising of all the afflictions. So therefore, this scientist who talks about how 90% of the negativity is a projection. So once you deal with the projection and distortion, then that part of the negativity will be removed. So we are all the same, especially those who have studied the text. So if you think years and years on emptiness, you will really see it has an impact. Say, for example, in my case, I have thought about emptiness for about 60 years. So I can see how gradually so it undermines grasping at substantially real person as a kind of a self-governing self. So then the afflictions that are rooted in that comes undermined. And then as I deepen my understanding of the subtle meaning of emptiness, of the absence of inherent existence of person, then regardless of whether I've culminated, reached the culmination, as my conviction deepens, I can assure you that the afflictions and distortions that arises from such grasping and inherent existence really gets undermined and decrease. So when we, for example, cultivate shamatha, so if you meditate on emptiness, the afflictions that are associated with sensual experience really comes to be diminished, because we are directly, countering, fundamental ignorance. So it's like a kind of a single remedy. It's like the single medication against all problems. Of course, there are many, many afflictions. So all of these afflictions really arise from the root of grasping at true existence. So the more we are able to turn our attention to understanding emptiness, the stronger the force it will be that will help undermine the power of the afflictions. This is a fact. So these days I explain to people. So grasping at the ignorant, grasping true existence is like the demon king, and the queen is like our lust and greed and attachment, and the chief minister is anger. So, and then they have retinues. So we speak of 84,000 afflictions. So all of these are really rooted in the ignorance. So therefore, if you can develop an antidote against this king-like ignorance, then everything will be powerful. So normally, in our naive perspective of the world, we tend to give credence to the perception of this grasping, and we feel as if the world really exists out there independently, and we nurture this kind of grasping inside our heart, and then from this we then grasp at some kind of person who is like the focus of that attention. So first we have to dismantle the grasping at the person as some kind of independent existence. So you have to point your finger at this kind of assumed self that is inside us. Once we're able to do that, there's a real power. So although self-cherishing is present also in the arhats, but they don't have self-cherishing that leads to all sorts of problems. But the self-cherishing that we have within us, because it is so intimately connected with the grasping at self, this is what leads to all the problem. So the more we are able to decrease the power of self-grasping, then the self-cherishing will also be undermined. So in this way, there's a real benefit that comes. So the conditions here refer to the wisdom. Causes refer to compassion and bodhicitta. So he writes, it's not possible for omniscience to be produced without causes. Because of it, where everything could always be omniscient. If things were produced without reliance on something else, they could exist without constraint. There would be no reason why everything could not be omniscient. So here, Kamalashila is explained that the Buddha that we aspire for, Buddhahood, comes from causes and conditions. It does not happen without any causes and conditions. And he says that we need to cultivate the understanding of what the causes and conditions. So he explains that how everything in the world are dependent on causes and conditions. So all things, they arise from their causes and conditions. Each of them have the capacity to produce an effect. So all of these dependently originated phenomena. So these are the factors that lead to our happiness and experience of suffering. Whereas constructs of the mind, such as the general characteristics, they are less relevant to our own experience of pain and pleasure. So if the Buddhahood does not depend on causes and conditions, then Buddhahood should be easily available for everyone. The fact that Buddhahood is not easily available means that it is dependent on causes and conditions. And Buddhahood needs to be cultivated through conscious effort. Whereas if we think about ignorance, grasping, and inherent existence, this is something that's part of our mind, part of our innate makeup. Even children have it. And when we think about previous lives, pre-existence, so the sense of I am and the grasping at this I is there in us since beginningless. So we are really deeply familiar with this. But this is what leads to a lot of our problems. Afflictions lead us to problem. Grasping and inherent existence lead us to problem. So it is by using our intelligence, engaging in inquiry, by using the key that the Buddha has given to us. And similarly, Nagarjuna and his followers, disciples have also given us the key. So using this key, we should open the door of our human intelligence. And then if we reflect, we will recognize that the true enemy are the grasping at inherent existence and cherishing at self, both of which exist in our heart since beginningless. So we cultivate the understanding of reality by studying, then critically reflect on it so that we can gain deep conviction, and then we cultivate that through meditative practice. So when we gain experience, initially the experience will be more effortful, but gradually we will also gain effortless experience of the realization of the truth. So then he explains that I shall explain what are the actual causes and conditions of the Buddhahood. So then Kamalashila explains that you need to recognize what are the correct causes and conditions, and also the complete causes and conditions. For example, if a farmer wants to cultivate a field, they need the seeds as well as the conditions that would help the seed to grow. So similarly, when we are sick, we need to know what is causing that illness, and what can be done to remove that illness, and what are the medications, and what are the conditions are necessary for that healing to take place. So the causes that we need to understand needs to be the correct ones, and we also need to have the understanding of the complete path. And it is by relying on a correct and a complete path we'll be able to attain the Buddhahood. So one of the conditions is to eat. So we're going to break for lunch. So in order to attain Buddhahood, we have to use our intelligence. In order to use our intelligence, we need a healthy body. And so to maintain a healthy body, we need to eat. But of course, food is important. But if we eat too much, in the second session, we might feel sleepy. So don't eat too much. You should eat food, but don't eat too much as well. So maybe we can resume at 1 o'clock, around 1. So make sure that you are in.